Ever left a family gathering early just to protect your peace?
They say family is supposed to be unconditional, a safe place to land when the rest of the world sharpens its claws, but for me, it's always been a carefully edited illusion, like a family Christmas card with perfectly matching sweaters. But just out of frame, someone's crying, someone's screaming, someone's biting their tongue so hard it bleeds. My name's Rachel, I'm 42, single, no kids, a senior project analyst for a company that makes industrial-grade filters. Glamorous, I know, and until about a month ago, I thought I had accepted my place in the family pecking order. Not the favorite, not the rebel, not even the black sheep. More like the sheep that built the fence and paid for the grass. I was the support beam that never made it into the pictures, and I had made my peace with that. At least I thought I had. It was a Thursday when the text came through. Not from my sister, no. That would have been too human. It came from her fiancé's assistant, who introduced herself as Brooklyn, like the borough, and who informed me, very kindly and very professionally, that due to some last-minute changes to the vision and aesthetic of the ceremony, I was no longer expected to attend Emily's wedding. I read it 3 times before I even processed what it meant. Not invited. Not wanted. Not good for the aesthetic. The aesthetic. It took everything in me not to laugh. Or scream. Or throw my phone against the fridge. Instead, I just stood there in my kitchen, barefoot in a t-shirt with a spaghetti stain, holding a mug of reheated coffee, staring at a text that effectively erased me from one of the biggest moments in my sister's life, not because we fought. Not because I made a scene, not even because I declined a role in the bridal party, but because I didn't fit the vibe. That was the phrase. The exact words. Like I was some outdated lamp that clashed with the rest of the decor. I didn't respond right away. I didn't cry either. I went upstairs, opened my closet, and looked at the dress I had bought 3 months earlier after Emily sent me a link titled Guest Color Palette. It was sage green, silk, simple but expensive. I'd spent $600 on it. She'd approved it. Sent me a thumbs up emoji. I remember that because it was the only communication I'd gotten from her in over a week. The thing is, this wasn't just about a wedding. Not even close. This was about years. Years of being there. Years of paying for things quietly and never throwing them in anyone's face. Years of saying it's fine when it wasn't. I was the one who lent Emily money when her ex-husband cleaned out their joint account. I was the one who helped her move 3 times in 5 years. I was the one who set up the college savings fund for her twins when she called me crying because she didn't know how they'd ever afford it. That was 12 years ago. Every month I contributed. I never asked her to match. I never even mentioned it again. But that night, after the text, I sat down at my desk, logged into the online portal where the account lived, and just stared at the balance. Over the years, it had grown to nearly $120,000. 2 kids, twin accounts, compounded interest, and regular monthly deposits. I'd never skipped one. Not once. Even when I got laid off in 2020 and had to dip into my own emergency fund to make the mortgage, I still paid into their future. Because I believed in being the kind of person who does right by her people, even when they don't see you. What gnawed at me wasn't just that I was uninvited, it was how casual it all was. Like they were cutting a name from a guest list to save on catering. Not a phone call. Not a voice memo. Just a secondhand cancellation from a woman named after a bridge. And even then, Emily didn't reach out. No follow-up. No apology. No attempt to soften the blow. Nothing. You know, you spend your whole life believing that doing the right thing, being dependable, stable, useful, will earn you a place at the table. Maybe not the head, but at least a seat. And then one day, you find out you're not just off the guest list, you're the punchline to a joke you didn't even know was being told. I started pulling receipts. Literally. I opened my email, searched her name, dug up every transfer confirmation, every tax document, every custodial form I had ever filed on behalf of her kids. I printed them out. Not for evidence. Not to wave in her face. But to remind myself I hadn't imagined any of it. That I had done something good. Something real. I had invested in her family more than I ever invested in my own dreams. The last document I opened was an automatic payment setup. $250 withdrawn on the first of every month like clockwork from my checking account into their 529 accounts. I looked at the next scheduled withdrawal. 4 days from now. And I swear to you, it was like something cracked in me, something quiet, deep, and cold. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just canceled the payment. And then I stared at the terminate account option. Not delete. Terminate. It sat there like a dare. Now, I'm not impulsive. I'm not dramatic. But in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: control. Not spite. Not revenge. Just the clarity that I had been playing a part in a story where I was never meant to be the hero, or even the sidekick. I was a resource. A line item. And maybe it was time I stopped funding someone else's fairy tale. I didn't click it. Not yet. But I hovered over it. And I knew sooner or later I would. Because this wasn't just about a wedding. This was about erasing a pattern. And I wasn't going to be part of her curated, filtered life anymore. Let her post her perfect wedding with her perfect vibe. But she'd better be ready to fund her own damn dreams. There's a very specific kind of silence that happens after someone betrays you without even realizing they've done it, or worse, realizing it fully and doing it anyway, and that silence isn't peaceful or still. It's sharp, full of echoes, full of questions that bounce around your head at 3 in the morning and refuse to be quieted, no matter how many times you try to drown them out with logic or excuses or wine or old family photos that, in hindsight, were always telling a different story than the one you believed at the time. In the days following that cold, dismissive text from my sister's wedding planner, or assistant, or whatever she was calling herself, I found myself digging through not just documents and financial records, but through memories I had filed away neatly under the category of normal family things. Only now I was starting to realize those things weren't normal, and they weren't really family, either. Not in the sense that matters. It's funny what you start to remember once the dam breaks. You think you've moved on from certain hurts, you think you've grown up and grown past them, but then a single moment, a single rejection, can yank back the curtain and suddenly you're not 42 years old and financially stable and self-sufficient, you're 13 again. Sitting in the back seat of your parents' station wagon while your little sister gets praised for winning, most improved, at her 5th grade dance recital, and no one notices that you got straight A's all year again. Quietly, like always. Or you're 21, back from college for Thanksgiving, helping in the kitchen while your mom chats with Emily about how graceful and photogenic she is, and not once does anyone ask how your new job at the publishing house is going. You're just there. Present. Reliable. The one who brings the pie, sets the table, takes the pictures, but never appears in them. The college fund had started as a spontaneous gesture, but not without meaning. Emily was in bad shape back then, emotionally and financially drained from her split with Derek, the kind of man who could charm the barista and forget to pick his own kids up from school in the same afternoon. I remember her calling me late one night, her voice low and raw, saying she didn't know how she'd ever be able to give the twins a future, that she was terrified they'd end up resenting her someday for not doing enough. And I remember so vividly sitting on the edge of my bed, holding the phone in one hand and a notepad in the other, already doing the math in my head while she cried quietly on the other end. I told her I'd take care of it. That I'd set up something steady, something smart, something long-term. I opened the accounts the next week, linked them to my payroll, and for the next 12 years, I never missed a contribution. Not once. And now here I was, sitting at my dining table with a printed-out ledger in front of me that documented every dollar I had put away, every dividend reinvested, every penny grown under my name, not hers. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about what the money had come to represent: time, loyalty, sacrifice, and a deep, unspoken desire to finally be seen not as the safety net, but as someone whose love mattered enough to be treated with basic respect. What stung wasn't that she'd uninvited me. It was that she never even considered what I might feel. Like it never crossed her mind. I could have called her. I could have written a long, emotional email. I could have asked why. I could have confronted her and maybe given her a chance to explain herself. But I didn't. Because some betrayals are so clear, so blindingly simple in their message, that there's nothing to discuss. What would she say? That her wedding planner thought I wasn't Instagram friendly enough? That I wore the wrong shoes to her engagement party? That I don't understand the vibe of the new life she's trying to build with a man who sends mass emails instead of birthday cards? So I logged into the account again. I sat there staring at the dashboard, the two names both familiar, both beloved in some quiet part of me that still wanted to protect them, and for the first time in a very long time, I asked myself who I was really protecting. Them? Or the illusion that if I just kept giving, kept showing up, kept being the good one, someone would finally turn around and see me standing there. Maybe it wasn't protection at all. Maybe it was just another way I'd allowed myself to be used, all under the disguise of family duty. I didn't click terminate that night. I saved it as a draft. I closed the browser. I went to bed. But I knew what I was going to do. The decision wasn't a flash of anger. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was a reckoning. A quiet reclaiming of everything I'd handed over without being asked, and without ever being thanked. The next morning, I went through my email archive and found the original documents I'd signed to become the custodian of the accounts. Technically, I owned them. Legally, I could dissolve them and reallocate the funds however I saw fit. Morally? That was trickier. But then again, morality only seems tricky when you're still trying to please people who don't give a damn about your boundaries. Once you stop doing that, things get very clear, very fast. By the third day, I'd scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor. Not to be impulsive, not to be petty, but to make sure everything was done right. Clean, quiet, irrevocable. The assistant emailed me again, Brooklyn. This time to confirm that the final guest list had been locked in. "Thank you for understanding," she wrote. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because the next morning, the tuition fund manager received an official termination request from me, with my signature and identification attached. And the balance? It's back where it started. In my hands. What they do next is their problem. But for once, I'm not funding the solution. The thing about blowing up a long quiet volcano, because that's what this was, no less volcanic than lava slowly rising beneath the surface for years, waiting for just the right disrespect to rupture the crust, is that you don't hear the explosion right away. There's a silence at first, almost serene, almost deceitfully calm, as if the world itself takes a breath before it decides how violently it wants to respond to your choice to stop playing nice, stop being the silent benefactor, stop being the dependable ghost everyone only remembers when it's time to ask for something. That calm lasted almost a full week, during which I half expected some kind of response from Emily, not an apology, no, because that would have required self-awareness, but at least some acknowledgement. Some text message laced with false sweetness or overused exclamation points pretending this was all just some misunderstanding, a scheduling mix-up, a miscommunication from the assistant, but what I got instead was the dreaded ping of the family group chat, a digital circus tent that had, for years, served as the primary venue for every superficial exchange, every passive-aggressive holiday plan, every birthday greeting that felt more like a required checkmark than an actual sentiment. It started with my mother, of course it did, her message short, clipped, and laced with just enough guilt to let me know which side she'd chosen before she even asked for my version of events. Emily says the kids' college fund is gone. Is that true? No greeting. No context. Just a landmine, casually dropped in a thread that also contained a photo of my cousin's new dog and a forwarded chain message about an elderly couple who'd danced together for 60 years. I didn't answer immediately. I wanted to. I wanted to unleash 12 years of receipts, 12 years of yes, I paid for that, and no, she didn't thank me, and yes, I did this out of love, and no, I didn't think I'd be erased from her life like a mismatched throw pillow. But I didn't. Not because I didn't have the words, but because I had too many, and none of them would change what had already been set in motion. Emily didn't hesitate. She jumped into the thread like it was a stage she'd been waiting to claim, her message so theatrical I almost admired the precision. I just think it's wild that someone could pretend to love your children like family and then rip away their future over something as petty as a guest list. I guess money really does show people's true colors. The irony of that line hit so hard, I actually laughed out loud, a bitter, hollow sound that startled even me. True colors. She wanted to talk about true colors after dismissing me from her wedding like I was some outdated accessory that didn't match the wallpaper. My uncle chimed in. He always does when drama shows up, not because he cares, but because he loves inserting himself into chaos he has no emotional stake in. He said something about taking the high road and family sticking together, which was hilarious considering the man hadn't visited his own sister in over a year, but still somehow felt qualified to lecture me on loyalty. And then the messages started pouring in faster: cousins, in-laws, people who hadn't spoken to me in months suddenly demanding explanations as if I owed them some formal press release on my personal finances. Some of the comments were subtle jabs wrapped in faux concern. Things like, "I hope everyone's okay. It's just so sad to see this kind of thing happen in our family," while others were straight-up accusations, with one second cousin writing, "Maybe it's not about the wedding. Maybe some people are just bitter and can't stand to see others happy." That one stung. Not because it was true, but because it was so confidently incorrect, so rooted in ignorance, and so reflective of how little these people had actually paid attention all these years. Still, I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. Not in that thread. Not in that digital coliseum where the crowd only shows up for blood. Instead, I closed the app, poured myself a glass of wine, and scrolled through my own photo library, pictures of me holding the twins when they were babies, taking them to the zoo, helping them carve pumpkins, cheering at their Little League games, showing up again and again in ways no one ever asked me to but everyone expected me to. None of those moments made it to the group chat. None of them were mentioned in the flood of finger-pointing. But I remembered them. Every one. Later that night, I got a private message from Emily's fiancé, Greg, the human equivalent of a business card, whose text began with, "Look, I don't want to get in the middle of family stuff," before promptly getting in the middle of family stuff. He told me I was overreacting, that this could have been handled privately, and that it's really unfair to the kids. I read his message 3 times, trying to find even a shred of humility, even a trace of acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't done anything except stop giving. But no. In his eyes, and clearly in Emily's too, my role had never been sister, or aunt, or person with boundaries. I had been a financial instrument, a mechanism that worked best when it was quiet, efficient, and emotionally unavailable. What no one seemed to understand, what they refused to see, was that my decision hadn't come from spite. It had come from clarity. The clarity that arrives when you finally see the shape of your own self-worth, when you stop begging people to notice your contributions and start acknowledging your own damn value without permission. They weren't mad because I did something cruel. They were mad because I stopped doing something convenient. By the end of the week, Emily had posted a cryptic story on social media, something about snakes in the family and protecting your peace, and while I'd love to say I didn't care, that it rolled off me like rain on a windshield, the truth is I did care. It hurt. Deeply. Not because I wanted to be part of her curated little world, but because I once thought I already was. I once thought my love and my loyalty and my consistency had earned me a seat at her table. Turns out, I was just the one who paid for the table. But the final confirmation that I had made the right decision came in the form of silence, not mine, but hers. Not once did Emily call me. Not once did she reach out directly to ask why, to offer her version of events, to clarify or apologize or even pretend she had regrets. She let the group chat do her dirty work. She let the narrative take shape in half-truths and accusations, and she never once tried to stop it. And so I poured myself another glass of wine, pulled up the confirmation email from the fund manager, and read the final line aloud to my empty living room, letting it echo in the quiet that followed. This custodial account has been officially terminated at the request of the primary funder. No going back. No reversing the transfer. No loophole. I clicked delete on the family group chat. I didn't need their questions anymore. I already had my answer. There's something particularly grotesque about watching your own family twist your actions into a narrative that fits their comfort, like watching people rearrange furniture in a burning house and insisting the smoke is just from a candle. In the weeks that followed my quiet, irreversible decision to terminate the college fund I had nurtured like an invisible third job for more than a decade, the collective effort to rewrite history went from subtle and confused to aggressive and alarmingly strategic, as if the family had unknowingly hired a PR firm to protect Emily's version of the truth, spinning my choice into an unprovoked, cruel attack rather than the long-awaited response to a decade of neglect, exclusion, and the soft kind of emotional abuse that never leaves a mark but still bruises the hell out of your soul. It started small, like all spin campaigns do, with a few relatives reaching out individually, not with genuine concern or curiosity, but with the practiced neutrality of people who had already made up their minds, but wanted to look fair. One of my aunts, a woman who once told me that therapy was for people with too much time on their hands, sent a message that began with, "I just want to understand your side," but quickly pivoted into a monologue about how hard this must be for Emily, and how everyone's trying to stay positive during such a special time, as if my emotional and financial boundaries were some kind of toxic cloud threatening to rain on the bridal parade. She didn't ask what led to my decision, and she certainly didn't ask how I was feeling. She was there to make sure I knew my grief wasn't convenient, that my hurt was interrupting the wedding mood board. By that point, the twins Ryan and Mia, now 17 and months away from high school graduation, had found out about the fund. Not from me, not from their mother, but from the whispers that had been seeded and spread like mildew through group chats, family calls, and passive-aggressive text threads that always ended with, "Just praying everyone can get past this." Ryan didn't say anything directly. He just unfollowed me on every platform. Quiet, swift, deliberate. That stung more than I expected. Mia, though, sent a message. It was short and to the point, written in a tone that was both accusatory and heartbreakingly hurt. "I thought you loved us. Guess we were just another bill to you." I must have read that sentence 20 times, each pass cutting deeper than the last, because it wasn't just untrue, it was devastatingly backwards. I had never once seen them as a bill. I saw them as family. I loved them as if they were mine. I showed up for their recitals and their birthday parties and their science fairs with enthusiasm and a camera and a genuine interest in who they were becoming. I remembered that Mia liked green grapes but hated red ones, and that Ryan always needed extra time with math but excelled in history. I kept their artwork on my fridge. I sent them postcards when I traveled. I remembered their favorite authors, their college dreams, their insecurities. And now, because I had finally said enough, all of that had been replaced with a single, ugly narrative that I had taken something from them out of spite. For a moment, I considered responding with a detailed explanation, a list of every dollar, every moment, every holiday spent in their orbit, trying to prove that I had been there in ways that mattered, in ways their own father never had. But then I stopped myself, because I realized I wasn't going to explain my value anymore, not to people who had already decided I was dispensable the moment I stopped being useful. Instead, I opened my laptop and drafted a reply that was neither cruel nor apologetic. It was honest, and perhaps that was the most radical thing I could offer in a family where truth was often sacrificed for the illusion of harmony. I wrote, "Love isn't a subscription service. And I don't owe anyone a renewal." Then I clicked send. Not because I thought it would change her mind, but because I needed to say it for me. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loud in its own way, filled with absence, with distance, with the uncomfortable realization that when you stop enabling people, you also stop being invited to their tables, not just physically, but emotionally. I knew what I was losing. I wasn't blind. I knew that the next time the twins graduated, or Emily hosted a holiday, or someone needed a babysitter, I wouldn't be asked. I wouldn't be included. I might even be talked about in lowered voices, as if my absence were a death no one wanted to acknowledge, but everyone knew had happened. And yet, I didn't regret it. Not even a little. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't swallowing my discomfort just to keep the family machine humming. I wasn't pretending to be okay with the scraps of connection I was being thrown. I wasn't financing a relationship that only existed when there was something to be gained. I had made a choice to reclaim my time, my energy, my dignity, and yes, my money from a family structure that had never truly valued the quiet, consistent work I did behind the scenes. The spin continued, of course. I heard through a cousin that Emily had told people I was struggling mentally and going through something because apparently, having boundaries and finally standing up for yourself can only be explained as a breakdown in our family, not a breakthrough. But I let them talk. Let them rewrite, spin, speculate. They didn't know the real story. They never had. Because knowing it would have required them to pay attention to someone who didn't demand the spotlight, who didn't throw tantrums or play victim, who didn't require anything more than common decency, and even that, it seemed, was too much to ask. So I let it burn. The expectations, the false image, the unspoken agreements that said I was supposed to give endlessly without asking for anything in return. I let it all burn to the ground. And in the ash, I found something I hadn't seen in years. Myself. Not the version they wanted, but the one I had buried to keep the peace. And this time, I wasn't giving her up again. There is a particular kind of peace that doesn't feel like joy and doesn't exactly feel like relief either, but rather like standing in the eye of a storm you've survived, not because it spared you, but because you finally stopped pretending it wasn't tearing your life apart one subtle gust at a time. That was the feeling I carried with me as I stood in a small, quiet kitchen at a rented cabin in the woods of northern Michigan, 3 hours from home, no cell signal, no Wi-Fi. And no sounds except the low hum of wind against the trees and the occasional crackle of wood shifting inside the fireplace. I had left town the night before Emily's wedding, not because I couldn't bear to see the pictures or hear the updates, but because I knew I didn't want to be anywhere within range of the explosion that would inevitably follow once her curated social world met the reality of the decisions she'd chosen to ignore, decisions that, this time, came with consequences she could not control. She got married without me. Of course she did. The event went forward as planned, with gold-leafed programs and hand-tied eucalyptus bunches, perfectly filtered selfies, and long captions about fresh beginnings and real love. My mother was there. So were most of the cousins, the ones who had either bought into the rewritten version of events or simply didn't care enough to question it. The twins were in matching attire, smiling, performing the version of family unity Emily had so carefully assembled like a designer jigsaw puzzle. To anyone scrolling through her posts, it looked flawless, joyful, intact. But I knew better. Because buried under the designer hashtags and professional photography was a secret they couldn't quite keep contained. The fund was gone. The tuition support, the lifeline, the cushion they had always quietly relied on vanished. Not in anger, not as punishment, but as a decision made in full knowledge that I was no longer willing to invest in people who believed my worth was conditional. That truth hadn't made it into the captions, of course, but it was beginning to bleed through. 2 days after the wedding, I received an email from Mia, not another angry demand, not a manipulative guilt trip, but a question. A simple, vulnerable question. Did we do something to make you stop loving us? And that broke something open in me in a way the public accusations never had, because no matter how old they get, kids always think the bomb that lands on their house is somehow their fault. And the truth was it wasn't. Not entirely. They had grown up watching their mother treat me like a service, not a sister. They had absorbed that narrative by osmosis, not malice. They had seen me as a wallet with a pulse, because that's what they'd been taught to see. I didn't respond right away. I let the message sit there, blinking unread, like a flame I wasn't quite ready to touch. I needed time. Time to figure out if I even wanted to engage again. Time to understand whether forgiveness was the same as returning to the role I had so finally walked away from. Time to determine if love could exist without self-erasure. And, more importantly, if it should. Meanwhile, back home, the family fallout had begun to gather momentum. Emily wasn't getting the applause she expected. Some of the older relatives, the ones who didn't live online and couldn't care less about aesthetic cohesion, started asking quiet questions, pulling aside my mother and my uncle during the reception, whispering things like, Where was Rachel? And is it true what they're saying? The illusion cracked, just slightly. Enough that even Emily, I suspect, felt it. Because 3 days after the wedding, while I sat beside the fireplace in my rented escape, sipping wine from a chipped mug and scratching behind the ears of the rescue dog I'd brought with me, I received a message from her, not through the group chat, not through her assistant, not through a cousin, but directly from her. 3 words. No preamble. No punctuation. Just, hope you're happy. And I sat there, blinking at the screen, not angry, not even particularly moved. Just tired. Tired of being blamed for the collapse of something I had carried on my back for years while everyone else just enjoyed the view. Tired of being seen as vindictive for finally setting down the weight I was never meant to carry alone. Tired of being assigned the role of villain in a story where my only sin was refusing to be invisible anymore. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have something to say, believe me, I did, but because I knew it wouldn't matter. Any explanation would be weaponized. Any softness would be used to drag me back into a dynamic I had fought so hard to escape. So I left her message unread, not out of pettiness, but as a boundary. A closed door. Not locked. Not slammed. Just closed. Instead, I raised my glass, not in celebration, not even in defiance, but in solemn recognition of something real, the end of a role I never auditioned for but played so well I forgot it wasn't who I was. I drank to my own peace, to my own presence, to the quiet knowing that I had done more than enough, for more than long enough, and that stepping away wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. I stayed at that cabin for 3 more days. I hiked. I read. I sat by the lake in the early mornings, watching fog lift from the water like a slow, forgiving breath. I thought about family, what it means, what it doesn't, and how often we confuse proximity for love, duty for connection. I didn't come away with answers. I didn't suddenly feel healed or whole or wise. But I did feel, for the first time in years, unhooked. No longer tethered to the impossible task of being everything to people who couldn't see me as anything beyond convenient. Maybe I'll write to Mia one day. Maybe I won't. That choice is mine now, and that freedom, the ability to decide what I give and to whom, is the truest form of peace I've ever known. And as for Emily, well, I wish her no harm. But I no longer wish her well either. I simply wish her away from me. Far enough that I never again mistake the sound of my own silence for the approval of others. Because in the end, the most powerful revenge isn't rage, and it isn't cruelty, it's removal. It's being unfindable by the people who took you for granted. It's becoming a ghost not because you vanished, but because you finally learned how to live. And that's exactly what I intend to keep doing. Quietly. Fully. On my terms. Always.